and this is Arcane Mark. Welcome to Design Diaries. Today I'm going to be talking about the Medium class, one of the 6 classes from Occult Adventures. The beginning of the story of the Medium class is basically the beginning of the story of Occult Adventures itself. Like many of these things, it began on a dark, although not stormy night, in Indianapolis at the creepy ambiance-filled St. Elmo's Steakhouse, where the rest of the design team, that's me, Stephen Radney McFarland, Logan Bonner, and Jason Bowman, were meeting with Eric Mona, our publisher, as well as Brandon Hodge, Paizo freelancer and master of the occult, and real-life Candyman. Together, we would discuss the project that would become known as Occult Adventures. And really, we picked Brandon's brain for what it means to be a cult. We talked about some very starting ideas of what sorts of things to include in the book. Different people had different things that they wanted in there. Like Jason was very keen on a class that used objects in some way. And he was particularly coming off of reading a lot of Dresden Files and some other series where they used objects a lot. And that would eventually become the occultist class. We all agreed that we wanted a class that would take in spirits. That would become the medium class. As well as some kind of a pet class. And that Brandon really wanted an ectoplasmicist class that shoots out snot like ectoplasm all the time and into thin tendrils and attacks you with things like that. That would eventually become the ectoplasmatist archetype for the spiritualist. So, once this meeting was done, we had a rough idea about some of the themes of Occult Adventures, and even at that point, we knew there was going to be a medium. We knew its name was probably going to be medium because taking spirits into you through a seance is what a medium does. And there wasn't that much movement on the medium for a little while after that. However, soon enough, we reached a point in time where we really needed to work on Occult Adventures, and there were so many questions in the office that we went on a mini retreat and just started talking about Occult Adventures only. And that's where the classes that you know today from Occult Adventures really started to take shape. And it was at that meeting where we were sure we were going to get a medium, a kineticist, a mesmerist, an occultist, a spiritualist, and, of course, a psychic. And sorry, Brendan, not an ectoplasmatist as one of the 6 occult classes. And at that point, we had a whole bunch of pre-writing notes about each of the different classes and ideas. And even at the very beginning, one of the key ideas for the medium was that the medium was going to be a little bit different depending on the spirits that they take in. There's a lot of different characters that have been around in the past that do something that's a little bit different when they switch themselves around. I think one of the earliest in the 3035 era was the Chameleon, but there's also the Factotum, which Jason designed for 3035. The Binder, which takes in spirits, has certainly some similarities as well. So we moved on from that meeting, and I was assigned the medium as my primary class and my first class that I started working on. Later, I would also take the kineticist because of the fact that I finished first. So the medium class really begs for a large number of cool, interesting spirits. And I wanted them to be a little bit different and basically be their own thing. Now, before this point in time, I had designed a homebrew shaman class that also had a lot of talking to spirits. It was not really like the shaman class for the advanced class guide. This was a while back in 3.5. But it did have the idea that multiple spirits could do things that were different for your character, but sort of as a shortcut, it used the different cleric domains for the spirits, and that was simple to do. It gave me a lot to play around with because there were a lot of domains, but for the medium spirits, I wanted them each to be different and thematic. And I wanted them to be categorizable in certain ways so that you could notice similarities between them. Particularly, I cared about ability scores. and which of ability score and which sort of type of ability that you're going to get better at. I quickly realized that some spirits were going to have different alignments and different personalities, and that there is something already in Pathfinder lore that is the matrix of all alignments times all ability scores, and that's the Harrow cards. Because the Harrow cards are 54 cards, one for each alignment ability score combination. So great. I decided we could use the Harrow cards, the themes of the Harrow cards, to represent each spirit. Now, that doesn't mean there are only 54 spirits that you would be able to embody. Unlike the vestiges of the binder or some similar ideas where it is one specific unique named entity, these 54 types of spirits would each be able to represent a whole host of different spirits who match that concept. So that gave me quite a lot to work with. I knew that with 54 spirits there was going to be a lot of legroom, and I wondered if we could fit 54 spirits, but it seemed pretty clear at the time to Jason that we could, because the Advanced Class Guide had 10 different classes, and Occult Adventures had only 6. And Occult Adventures also, people were very excited about it, so if we needed an extra signature, that's 16 pages in the publishing biz, then it seemed like we might be able to get it. And we decided, let's try that idea. So we had 54 possible spirits, but how are they going to interplay with the class? Well, the first idea, and one that we actually had during the retreat, because in the retreat we made sort of some basic ideas of what's the hit dice of this class, maybe how many skill points does it probably have, what are its progressions, and we decided at that point that the medium probably got a really weak chassis for its starting chassis for its progressions. Like, its attack bonus, only medium. Its saving throws, yeah, will, but not any other saves. And just generally didn't get a very strong progression on its stats, but then, based on which spirits you picked, you'd be able to get a spirit bonus that could help you out a lot. For instance, on attacks, if you put the strength spirit, AC, reflex save for a dex spirit, and so on. So that seemed pretty cool, and that immediately spoke to the beginning of the class with some kind of progression for this spirit bonus that had to make up for some of the weaknesses in the core chassis of the medium. So that was one of the first things that went into the class. Now, when I started designing the medium with its spirits, then it looks like we have a question. Are we talking about spiritualists? We are talking about mediums. So it's a little bit different. They're the ones who take the spirits in rather than have the spirit pets around. Alright, cool. So, the other thing I was really interested in trying with the medium, and this is one thing that you will not have known up until this point if you started with the playtest, because this is all pre-playtest, is I was kind of interested in the idea that you see in a lot of different places, like the Persona games is one good example, of someone who can switch around from a bunch of different spirits fairly easily to change up their skill set on the fly. So right away, the Alpha medium had that ability. There was a smaller number of spirits that you contacted during seance at the beginning of the day, but still not just one, or not just the set you were going to use. And then, from among those spirits that you contacted, let's say you had 6 choices, you were capable of using a special ability to change between those 6. Started out that it took a really long time and took your standard action. Eventually, it was a swift action. So, hey, you need to be huge, take the bear. The bear spirit, by the time it was a swift action, spam, you're huge. Oh, being huge is a pain? Alright, well, you're back to medium size, and now a lantern is following around and doing tricky stuff. So, this gave you a lot of on-the-fly flexibility. And those of you familiar with the playtest medium know that it eventually got up to 4 spirits, and it got a second spirit relatively quickly. The original alpha medium only got a second spirit after quite a while, and it never got any more than that because you had 2 active at a time, but you could quickly switch around which 2 you had active and use that to mix and match your playstyle on the fly. Now, this also made for some interesting ways that the spirits interacted, and there was eventually some other abilities that you might recognize from the playtest medium were added around that point. So you had the spirit bonus that went up at certain levels. You had the spirit powers, which increased at certain levels. There were 4 tiers of powers. And you had an ability to switch around that was called Many Faces, that let you switch sort of your face, your spirit, into a different kind of spirit. And then the trance ability, which is one you'll recognize from the playtest medium, which lets you boost one of the spirits that is currently within you and get a more powerful ability for a limited time, or it lets you add an extra spirit that you never had before. And one thing that the trance ability used, and that switching around your spirits a lot did use, so there was some limitation, is the influence system. So in the fiction of mediums, there's always the question of, well, is this spirit just riding you? Is it taking over? Is it too strong? What's going on? The influence system was something that was all the way there since the beginning to determine whether or not the spirit had a lot of control over you. If it gets too high, the spirit completely takes control and you black out and wake up the next day and you're not sure what just happened. So the medium spirit had that as a very useful ability, and that was how we could determine how often you could trance. So there wasn't a daily limit on your number of trances. You could just do it as often as you wanted and get the more powerful abilities. But if you tranced too many times, that spirit was going to take over. But if you mixed and matched among all your spirits, then that was less likely. So that was essentially how the alpha medium sort of started. And I put that past the other designers, and that's when I found out that while my personal playstyle is definitely very sort of vigorous choices on a round-by-round basis, that there are not really that many people in the player base at large who are not game designers or super into the system who can handle that kind of analysis paralysis. So Jason especially recommended that, as with the Factotum and some of the other classes that he had designed that were very versatile, that you would offload that flexibility to the beginning of the day. Prepared spellcasters are similar in that manner as well. Essentially, he recommended just pick which spirits you had, which 2 spirits or 1 spirit, depending on your level you had at the beginning of the day, and then don't switch them around. So I did some analysis of that, and I determined that the loss of flexibility meant that you probably needed to be able to get little pieces of more spirits for this to work out. That's how it increased to eventually giving you 4 spirits, but you get smaller and smaller pieces of the later spirits. As well, I added some interesting additional abilities that allowed you to pick up more and more spirits and become an astral beacon at really high levels where you suddenly got a ton of spirits all at the same time. So this was very close to the playtest medium that you guys may know and love if you played the playtest for Occult Adventures. However, obviously writing 54 spirits for the playtest seemed a little bit foolhardy, given how much time and effort that would take, and that things could change during the playtest, potentially a lot. It looks like there's a question in the audience. It's funny, the impression was that the round-by-round analysis element was considered too much, when I've always felt the prepared casters to be much more onerous. Well, Loresana, I kind of agree that the prepared caster stuff at the beginning of the day can be really time-consuming. My group has sometimes taken multiple hours at high levels to have everyone have prepared their spells, so I get where you're coming from with that. But at the very least, that is something that happens, and then for the rest of the game day, or especially in the middle of a turn, it couldn't happen. And that was sort of Jason's point on that matter. So, when it came to the spirits, I decided to design about 1/3 of the possible spirits. Because of the fact that the way that the spirits now worked was that you needed to match their alignments or ability scores so that they could sort of get along well, I decided to loosen that restriction since I wasn't going to be giving you all 54 spirits, so that good spirits got along with each other, and the neutral spirits got along with each other, never mind that lawful, neutral, and chaotic neutral are polar opposites, and the evil spirits got along with each other just for the purpose of the playtest. The way that the interaction between them went was essentially you could take any secondary spirit that matched either the alignment or ability score of your primary spirit, and to make sure that it wasn't just that you had to sort of make a decision whether you were going to try to stack up 1,000,000 spirit bonuses or get a bunch of special abilities. If they have the same ability score, so they have the same spirit bonus, then you get more special abilities. If they have a different ability score, then you just get the new spirit bonus. So you could, in theory, have 4 spirits that all have the same alignment and different ability scores and have spirit bonuses to everything, and all of your stats are super high, but you only have the primary spirit's special abilities. At least that was a possibility. It turns out I was able to put in some other little elements that I kind of enjoyed later on, such as, for instance, the twin, which is a Harrow card known for being confusing, not what it seems, or otherwise a very hard one to read in a harrowing, which was able to duplicate another card or another spirit that you just tranced and then swap around your spirits at a particular time, which was a super fun one that had a little bit of the elements of the alpha medium baked into it. And as well, there were some of the other spirits that did so as well. So that was the playtest medium. We sent it out, we packaged it, and we put it in the playtest. And we had some interesting responses to the playtest medium. One of the most fascinating parts of the Occult Adventures playtest was actually an interesting meta that kind of swayed a lot of the playtest data. And it might not be what you expect. Right before the Occult Adventures playtest came out, there was the release of the Emerald Spire. And so a ton of people had the Emerald Spire. And also, the one of the Pathfinder Society scenarios that had just come out was Halls of the Flesh Eaters, which sounds like a very occult adventure. So huge numbers of the playtests were either the first floor of the Emerald Spire or Halls of the Flesh Eaters. Now, we're about at nearing Pathfinder 2nd edition, so, but still, if you don't want to hear a little bit about either of those two adventures, then mute me, and I will wave my hand again when you can unmute. Alright? Here we go. The first floor of the Emerald Spire is entirely dark, and light magic doesn't exactly work the way it should. Alright? A lot of you probably know that if you've played the Emerald Spire. Now, but here's the thing. One of the most popular medium builds used the Bear Spirit, which is really good at natural attacks and claws. Half-orcs and tieflings can also add a bite attack, which is a no-brainer addition for a claw build. So a ton of people played half-orcs and tiefling mediums, who then could see in the darkness in that first floor, and then the medium was reported from those playtests as being the best, because nobody else could see. Halls of the Flesh Eater had a different problem, where pretty much everything in the adventure was immune to mind affecting, and that meant that the Mesmerist and some of the other classes looked weaker because they had a lot of mind affecting. Alright, well, now that I've said that, I'm going to wave to the people. Wave, come back, come back. Alright. So, now that everybody is back and listening again, let's talk about some of the other feedback for the medium. So, it seemed that based on which spirits people took, some of the feedback varied. For example, the Demon's Lantern spirit was not as good as some of the other spirits, and some people who focused only on the Demon's Lantern gave some good feedback about how to improve the Demon's Lantern. Overall, people were pretty happy with the general direction of the medium, except for a branch of people who kind of wanted the medium to be called the spiritualist, or generally be more about ghosts and less about astral spirits. That was sort of one of the main branches off, but we kind of decided not to do that. One thing we did decide to add to give it a little bit more sort of random flavor and utility were a few haunt-related abilities and the ability to channel the spirits of the dead, because some mediums do channel the spirits of the dead, and so we added a few extra flavorful abilities to the medium. Alright, so great. That's pretty cool. That seemed to work out. Everything's fine, right? Well, not exactly. We continued to iterate throughout the end of the playtest, and especially once the playtest was closed, on the different classes. And I had two, because I had the kineticist and the medium, so that took a while, but I did have them finished fairly quickly. Our plan was, once everyone finished all of their classes, we were going to have a big meeting where we talked about everything in the playtest, everything we had seen about the other classes, ideas that we had moving forward, and that would be done before yet another more final pass on everything, and then we would move on to something else. Particularly because of the way the timing worked out here, we were doing some of this class work for Occult Adventures before doing some of the other stuff for Unchained, even though Unchained actually came out before Occult Adventures. It's just sort of how the playtest worked. Well, I'd reached the point that other than designing the other 36 spirits, I had updated everything from the playtest for the kineticist and for the medium. But one of the disadvantages of having the director of game design for the entire company also doing some ground level design work is that Jason is always very busy. He had not finished the occultist yet by that point. So basically, we were stuck in a situation where we weren't able to quite move on with the classes. I could create more spirits, so I asked, maybe before I make the other 36 spirits, I could move on to Unchained or some other project, but the team was very, very, very nice to me when I was new. They let me add a bunch of stuff to Unchained. There's a lot that they really didn't have to do for the new guy that was super welcoming, but with good reason, they didn't want me to start on a book that nobody else was working on just by myself, having never done a book before. So Jason said, no, just write some more medium spirits. There's 36 more. And I said, sure, I'll write them. I'm worried, though, that even though we have this extra space, that it's not going to fit. And he looked at me, and he narrowed his eyes, and he nodded. He said, oh, it'll fit. There are fewer classes. So I kept writing more medium spirits, and each day I would report my progress and talk about how many medium spirits we had, and I would be a little bit more concerned with how long the medium spirit section was. Well, this continued for a while. Eventually I finished all of the medium spirits, and we found some other things to do after that as well. Pretty much the same day, later on, after an executive meeting, Jason came into the room, and he sort of heavily dropped sort of a stack of papers that he had from that meeting. He said, bad news, everyone, about Occult Adventures. And I said, is it that the class chapter is over? And Jason said, no, the class chapter is way over. And that's when we learned that, in fact, 54 spirits definitely were not going to fit in the book. So what do we do, though, right? We had to move onward to do some of the other stuff with Unchained. And also some of the other stuff in Occult Adventures when that came in. We didn't have time to completely go back to the drawing board. There were a few options that were floated around. One of them was to potentially reduce the spirits to a very small number and move them to another chapter in the book. And that in this new home, they would be something that anybody could take with a feat chain and get all of the powers from it. And that was something that I wasn't too thrilled with, on the grounds that either you're making a feat chain that is super overpowered because it gives really powerful, unique abilities that can hang the class and make the class really feel like a whole class, or you make abilities that are a reasonable strength for a feat chain, And then you have a class that is not very good because all it gets are abilities that other people could have with a feat chain. So people listened to that and they thought, yeah, that's not going to work. So what if we reduce the spirits down to 18 or 20? We cut off 6 pages from the spiritualist and 6 pages from the kineticist. It might have been 4 pages from the spiritualist. A lot of classes were going to lose a lot of pages from the page count that they eventually got. And having done the kineticist, I knew and I said, there already aren't enough kinetic talents in this book for what I would like to have. There's no way we can cut that many pages from the kineticist and have enough functional talents. But there might be a way to cut all of the pages that we need essentially from the medium, and like 1 extra spread, that's 2 pages in publishing biz, was from the spiritualist or somewhere that I can't remember at the time. So basically the idea was, I had a 6x9 matrix of spirits. What if we brought it down to just be 6 or 9? Now, having 1 for each alignment, that the only thing that they share in common is the alignment, didn't make sense. What if I did 6 ability scores? And Steven said, well, what if you did the 6 mythic paths? And I thought about it for about a few seconds and said, wait a minute, I had not realized this when I was running mythic, but really the 6 mythic paths are the 6 ability scores, because Guardian's Con and Champion's Strength and Trickster's Dex and so on. And that is when it became the 6 mythic paths. So a lot of other things changed to make the 6 mythic paths sort of work for the medium. And some of the new ideas that had come in from the playtest, nobody ever really fully saw worked out, also went away. For instance, people in the playtest were talking about, what if you had a very passive spirit and you want to sort of show what's going on and have an action that feels like you're being a medium, which created the beseech action, which you can use in combat to do certain very small little things that are different for each of the 6 ability scores. Well, we didn't need the beseech action anymore, because with only 6 mythic paths, it was pretty clear that you were going to get 1 of the 6 at any given time. And that one that you had would essentially determine everything that your character was going to do. So each of the 6 drastically covers more ground than any of the original 54, since it's making up for eventually 4 spirits that you would have had at the same time. So we have the champion, who winds up getting just a great attack bonus and an extra attack and a bunch of other really powerful things for fighting. The trickster, who can get better at skills. The marshal, who has deceptively powerful abilities to buff the team in just the clutch moments, is probably the hardest to understand just how much stuff it's doing unless you play the marshal. The archmage and hierophant, for when you really need a 6th level arcane or divine caster at a certain moment. And then the guardian for defensive type stuff, which almost guaranteed was going to be the one that people picked the least, because defense is just not as exciting as offense, and it totally was. They also got some new abilities to eventually let you temporarily have more than one of these active at the same time, but they were much higher level, much more limited. Still with the influence system, as well as taboos, which let you sort of adopt an aspect of that spirit in order to help ameliorate the influence. Oh, and I forgot to mention the spirit die, which was another little thing that you could do to add on a d6 in exchange for influence retroactively after you failed on a certain check. That is sort of how the marshal gets their bread and butter in the final medium, is by throwing that spirit die and on anybody, anytime, anywhere. Pretty useful. Alright, so that works itself out to when the medium was released, or at least to the medium class as it would be released. But I still wanted to slip in at least something that was similar to that alpha medium that I like, that changed things up, possibly on a round by round or at least a combat by combat basis. And I checked to make sure it was okay, and everyone agreed that an archetype that did that would be fine. Now, we had a bunch of archetypes that were really cool, written by John Compton, that we absolutely could not use because they were written for the playtest medium. So I had to come up with a bunch of new archetypes on the fly as we were doing the archetype stage of Occult Adventures. And one of the ones I made was the Spirit Dancer. The Spirit Dancer is able to have their spirits for only rounds per day. It had to have some kind of drawback given the fact that everybody else can't just switch their spirit constantly. But it's a lot of rounds like a barbarian. Barbarians almost never run out. And then the Spirit Dancer also can switch whenever they go into their spirit dance to a different spirit, which is super cool. If I had had space to write feats that were specifically only for an archetype, I would have probably put in a feat for the Spirit Dancer like the Task Reveler feat for the Masquerade Reveler archetype I created for Wright Publishing. The Task Reveler feat is one that lets you sort of keep on your mask as a Masquerade Reveler while you're doing a really, really long task, as long as you just do that one thing. It was useful if you had a mask also measured in rounds per day that gave you a skill bonus and you wanted a diplomacy, but the diplomacy took a minute. That would cost 10 of your rounds. So that feat said, oh yeah, it costs 3 rounds no matter how long the task is, as long as you don't do anything else. So I would have created that for the Spirit Dancer, so that, for instance, if you wanted to cast a spell with a 10-minute casting time from the Archmage, you could do that. So now we know a little bit about the medium as it made it into the final book. But there's not really much that most people know about the other 36 spirits, and a lot of people have asked me about that. If you're watching this video, you might be one of the people who asked me about the other 36 spirits, and what can we do about them? There was a history of those spirits that went on for a little while, where I kept trying to ask anytime we had a meeting, which was generally run by the developers because it's about the campaign setting and the player companions. At that point in time, I would suggest a Harrow-themed book that had all of this Harrowed medium in it. And eventually, people kind of got fed up with that as a suggestion, and it was never selected as a book. But there were a lot of interesting and unusual moments, such as on a Reddit Ask Me Anything, when someone asked our then editor-in-chief, Wes Schneider, if they would put out such a book, and he said, any time now, which to me was news, because I had heard that it was definitely not going to come out, and then people started asking me again. So, and Lord Asana says, it me, although that may have been from earlier on. So, this continued with the back and forth for a while, and we're still in a state where Pathfinder 2nd Edition is coming out. The It Me was about Emerald Spire, and everyone playtesting with Emerald Spire. Cool, thank you. With 2nd Edition coming out, like, it's pretty clear that a product is not coming out, and it's Paizo work product. We can't really release a PDF or something because the amount of time that and energy and money that it takes to get a professionally presented version of it is going to be way higher than anything else you could get out of it, and Paizo is not going to put out something that's not professionally presented because it doesn't reflect well. And that's sort of where we're at with the Harrowed medium content. However, while I obviously cannot give you the Harrowed medium, there is one thing I can give you, and those of you who were watching me on social media know that I have said that there's going to be a surprise guest on the show. So, I have brought to you today the world's only player who has played a Harrowed medium. Now, this player works at Paizo and therefore has access to the Harrowed medium, and I am going to give a mini interview where we learn about the Harrowed medium. So, Linda, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Alright, it looks like people are saying hi to you, Linda. Alright, so I'd like to ask you a little bit about your Herald Medium, the only Herald Medium worldwide that has access to all 54 spirits. So, can you tell me a little bit about your character? I know that's a question that people almost never ask, but people almost always want to answer.
The dream. Yeah, so my Herald Medium, her name is Tethys Kaibali. She is a tiefling, and the general idea behind her build is I knew that I was going to be likely the only person who ever got to play the Herald Medium, so I wanted to be sure that I really got as many spirits as possible. So she's like 12th level now. She has 18 different spirits to choose from. Since I just basically took extra spirits for all of my feats. One of the things that's been really cool with playing her and having all those different spirits is playing a character that is very receptive to the influences of the different spirits. So if she has taken on the spirit of the beating that day, then she's going to be acting more run down or less confident. Whereas if she's taken on a more glib spirit or a more charitable spirit, just having those interact. And as you get to higher level, as Mark was saying, you have more spirits that are interacting at the same time. So the sort of the role playing dynamic of having these different spirits that are all active at the same time, maybe pulling you in different directions, and how that shapes the character's personality has been really fascinating.
Cool. And how did your character think of the different spirits that she had access to? Were they tarot cards to her?
Not exactly. I sort of consider the hero cards to be an inspiration, but then I decided to give them more sea-themed names. So, like, there's a card, the Cyclones. So I renamed that the Eye after the Eye of a Bendigo. Or instead of saying the Keep, which is a spirit that's very much based around, you know, being solid and staying in place and being unmovable, I decided to call that one the Anchor.
All right. And what adventure path was this character in?
So this is in a game of Skull and Shackles. Actually, I started with Tethys and another character who is a kineticist, just sort of as a way to get some more playtest data. I'm also the GM in this game, and Mark is playing 3 characters.
And that's right. We made it so that we could get lots of playtest feedback that were not all Emerald Spire and Halls of the Flesh Eaters. Then decided to keep playing on the grounds that it contains the world's only Herald Medium.
Plus, it's just fun, you know? It's not just because she's the only one. I mean, it's a really fascinating character to play. And it's a lot of fun to work out what those different combinations are going to be. I really like to try to prepare different sets each day, depending on whether it's going to be a day that I'm going to be focused on being able to pick up the party's best weapons and do well with those, or being able to get into melee combat or with my claws, or whether I more want to help out the rest of the party with assistance and things like that.
Can you tell me a little bit about any of Tethys' favorite combinations?
Well, yeah, there's several that are quite nice. So one of the ones that I often do involves the I'll just use the hero card names for the moment to make it a little clearer. But like the bear and the beating together, so that you are so that I'm focusing both on my own ability to fight and also the ability to, with the beating Seance Boon, to grant other characters the ability to gain bonuses to damage. There's some other ones, like, let's see, it's honestly been a little while since I've played this, so I'm trying to remember like exactly which one, but there's some combinations with the winged serpent, which is about being very, very agile and noticing what's going on. And also, what was the other one I was
using? Did you have winged serpent owl?
Yes, it was winged serpent owl and a bear. Yes,
it was the owl bear.
The owl bear. That's right. So you can be like, because the owl is about like noticing other things that are going on around you in terms of like the status of other characters. So you both
the edge between life and death.
Yes,
and when enemies are at low hit points.
So you're both going to be good at the initiative and being able to react quickly, and also noticing when enemies are at low hit points.
Did you have one combo that was like you with the unicorn and the juggler?
And the juggler, yeah, and you were changing things around in terms of like switching your abilities. And then there was another one that was all about the demon's lantern and trickery, different trickery spirits, where you're replacing yourself with like a little light clone of yourself, but also having more also having some more like things going on with dexterity, so you're very, very active and agile.
Great. Does anyone in chat have any questions for Linda? It says, "Oh man, I just like all the different hero cards, and I'm so envious. It sounds awesome."
It is pretty fun, yeah. I wish it had been able to go up.
Can you tell me a little more about Tethys' personality?
Oh yeah, so in playing her, I wanted to make a character that would be more easily malleable in a way, but you can't really tell exactly to what extent. So she's actually a medium whose job is to be a fake medium, but she really has medium powers, so she carries around with her like a bunch of crystals and incense and things like that, and unless someone's like actually paying her legitimate money, she'll just fake it. But the idea with that is that she's a character who's very high bluff, so nobody really ever knows to the extent to which she's being influenced by these forces or just kind of playing it up or what's going on with her.
I remember when Occult Adventures was just being play tested, so it wasn't really around a lot, that the shaman was very skeptical about any of this situation until he eventually, since he had high wisdom, realized that she was lying about or faking being fake.
Yes. She was faking being fake.
And she was trying to make it look like her stuff was phony when it was actually real.
Well,
which
because
was very
and
he wouldn't do the seance until then, so he wasn't getting the seance boon.
Yeah, well, it's always good whenever you don't metagame, right? You let the characters discover what's going on at their own pace and react to it as feels natural for them.
Alright, looks like the chat is saying, "Sounds so much fun, damn, and cool concept."
Thanks.
Alright, so, if nobody has any more questions or does anyone have any more questions for Linda about her medium, Tethys? Or any questions for me about mediums in general, the medium process? Alright, the question is from Rexa Liquid. Do you do harrow readings in-game? That is an amazing question because it's a great story. So both of us actually do a lot of harrow readings in-game where we'll just play it out and we will read the cards, and I have definitely had players who thought that somehow we were stacking the deck because they were like, wait, wow, those cards were really predicting exactly what was happening, just showing how much it is easy to say something generic that feels like it works. But the funny story is that when we went to PaizoCon for a few years, we didn't really get anything in the lottery. But Linda always wanted us to rank Bastard Hall by Wes Schneider as our number one thing in the lottery. We always did. And one year we got Bastard Hall, and that is Wes's sort of Ustalov, really creepy mega dungeon. And we played some twin characters who were vaguely related to the family that was in the dungeon. And Linda was a harrower named Carafinia. And she performed a harrow reading at the beginning of the game and actually did the reading, and Wes was so excited and he took a picture of it, and Linda thought that was hilarious and great because, remember, we were not working for Paizo, we were just fans who were there, and one of the Paizo people really liked the harrow
it was like,
readings.
oh my gosh, Wes thinks my thing is cool, and then like a few years later he's my boss, so it's just like, wow,
Yep. So we definitely do them, and if you were here to watch my divination episode on Saturday, then you know that some of the same skills that make it easier to handle divination spells are super useful when you're doing a harrow reading in-game. We have another question here from Sheppy T.S. Rodriguez. Wasn't it overly complicated in terms of bookkeeping? And I'll ask this specifically to you, Linda, because most characters would not have had 18 spirits. You took a feat to give you 2 extra spirits, like 5 times.
Yeah. I took extra spirit like 5 times is basically all of my feats, and I also started playing around with the twin and the juggler and the most complicated spirits. So I really got into trying to make different combinations with it, but really, it would be easy to set it up so you just had like, okay, you know what? These are my 3 or 4 go-to combinations. This is what I'm gonna do. And I'm not gonna like go around and experiment with all the possible ways that I could build these options.
So would you say the bookkeeping would have been intense if you figured out every possible combination that was legal for your spirits, but that because of the fact that you found some that just seemed cool, that those were easier to handle?
Yeah, I just built some that seemed cool. I was thinking, okay, what's one that's going to be really effective in combat? Which one's going to be really good at like in terms of doing a lot of damage? What's one that's going to be like really perceptive? What's one that's going to be really good at helping the rest of the party? And I just built that. And then some other times I just picked some spirits that happened to go together. And it didn't always work out quite as well when I did that, but it was fun to experiment.
So another question for me: can the Harrow medium change spirits mid-combat? I'm not sure if you said they could. So the answer to that question is the Alpha 1 could, and I need to make this clear. The playtest and the final Harrow medium before we scrapped it for the final medium does not do that. They pick it at the beginning of the day. There are a few ways that you could potentially change them out, such as by using some of the powers of the twin to swap the order of your spirits, and the empty throne, which lets you hold more seances during the day, which is one of the ones that was not around from before, as well as a few other combinations like that. But by and large, you could not change them mid-combat, but you could hold a trance in the middle of combat where you temporarily gained a new spirit, and that trance also lets you boost one of your current spirits, which basically gives you one of that spirit's powers 6 levels early. So, for instance, there's one spirit that eventually just lets you give everybody you meet a limited wish every day, but that's at level 19. At level 13, you can boost for a limited wish a few times a day. It's still pretty good.
Almost. We're level 12.
Yeah, that's next level.
Mm-hmm.
So then you have the unicorn, which is the one that has the limited wish. So we will be able to wish things from the wishing medium next level, which should be soon. Alright, let's see. Are there any more questions? It looks like that's about it for questions for now, but I'll give you guys one more chance. Anything else that you want to know about either from me about the medium process, or from Linda about Tethys Kybali, the world's only 54 spirit Harrow medium? Alright, Lord Asana says, my jealousy is tangible.
Sorry.
Alright. Well, cool. That sounds about good. Thanks for joining us, Linda. But before you go, I will give a super spoilery secret. Watch this, everyone.
I think it works better when you go from the other direction, right?
Okay, maybe. Yes, we're in the same room. It's not actually... Hi, it's not actually 2 different places with Skype. Turns out. Oh, wait, there is a question from Alex Agunas. With Pathfinder 2nd Edition coming out, have you thought about whether you'd want to see the 2e medium be based on Mythic Paths or Harrow cards? Alright, that's a good question, Alex. I would say that it makes sense for the medium to probably look like the original medium, since people have been playing with that medium for a while, but there's space for both of them. And maybe the name of the one that is based on Harrow cards is different. I could definitely see a lot of different ways to deal with it. Also, this is by no means a guarantee that we'll have a medium class. I don't know which classes are going to be around, except for that it seems pretty likely that super popular in all of the polls, Oracle, that we've mentioned before, I think Jason's mentioned before, was very popular and seems almost a guarantee, and also Witches, which are a major part of Irisen, and that people keep thinking was higher in the polls, even though we say it's Oracles. So those 2 seem super likely, and we've even said they seem super likely. Anything else? Not really sure. Alright, we have a question, which is from the Unfortunate Pumpkin. What? Alright, I don't know how to answer that question. Alright. So, let's see. We've talked a little bit about the Harrowed medium, and we've learned about its process, and we've learned about Linda's character. So, I think that that's pretty good. And for the YouTubers, I'm going to say good night